Welcome to episode 32 of the One Life Church podcast, where we talk about things from One Life Church, but ultimately things we think could relate to you and your one and only life. My name is Sarah, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the podcast, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-hosts and our lead pastor, Bret Nicholson.
Hey, Sarah. 32 sounded impressive to me. I don't know what that was, but it was like it's next level stuff now.
Start getting into 30s, and then I start thinking about when we get to 52, that means a year.
Ooh, it does. Yeah. That's true.
You think
that's
of time a little bit different. Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. But 32 episodes. So super fun. And we are joined today by Ryan Nunn and Josh Stanley, who are both part of the One Life Church staff and both at our Henderson campus.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Excited to be here. This is my second time on the podcast, so nice. I'm starting to get there.
Getting used to it.
I'll be a professional before you know it.
That's right.
Ryan's been on a few times, and we appreciate you guys coming on and talking with us today. And what we want to do today, beginning this Sunday at every One Life Church campus, we're offering what we call our Kickstart group, and that is just a way for you to find out a little bit more about One Life, who we are, what we believe, why we believe it, the mission, the vision, the values, and also just kind of exploring how to get connected to other people. So it's an opportunity for people. And at the end of that grouping experience, we ask people, hey, if you have any more questions about faith or about One Life, write them down on a card and turn them in. And we take an opportunity to either maybe write them through our blog post or talk about them here on the podcast. And so we're going to do that today, which should be pretty fun. We always get some really fun conversations, and we will say this probably multiple times, but we're not saying that this is what you have to believe on everything. These are just the conversations that we're going to have and hopefully help you understand some of these things a little bit better, or a better way to explore them for yourself. But before we do that, Josh actually leads the Kickstart group at our Henderson campus, and I think it's cool to maybe take some time and just talk about what Kickstart is and what that's been like for you. So Josh, tell us a little bit about what Kickstart's been like since you've been leading it.
Yeah, so my wife Kelsey and I have led Kickstart for the last couple of years now, and it's been a really cool experience to be able to do that. But before any of that, Kelsey and I both grew up in church, and, we moved to Henderson and we were looking for a church home. And I think it was either the second week we were there or maybe the very first week, Kickstart was being offered. And so I was like, well, Kelsey, this is what we need to do. We need to go through Kickstart, and, kind of figure out what this is all about, while we're trying to decide where we're going to call home. So we went through Kickstart, and it answered most of my questions as far as, who we are, what we are, who One Life is, what the whole story is. And it was an awesome experience for us. Since we've been leading it, it's gone through some different changes. And when we went through it, it was a 4-week course. Now it's down to a 2-week course. And I think that's been kind of cool, to kind of shrink that into 2 concise weeks. But essentially what it is just kind of the who we are, what we're about of One Life. And it really fleshes out our mission and vision on that first session. And then on that second session, our 12 value statements. And it really is, if you're new coming into One Life, whether that means you're, new to the faith, or you're just new to Henderson, or just new to One Life in Henderson, or, in any One Life campus, I guess. But it just kind of allows you the opportunity to figure out what it is that we believe, as far as, how we do things, why we do them that way, and, just what it means from coming from our seat. And I think it's been really cool. Kelsey and I have met a lot of cool people, a lot of people from the community there in Henderson, and, kind of just to see their walk of life and where they're from, and help them to find a place at the campus to kind of get involved, find their niche group of people that they can do life with, whether that be in a kind of a growth setting in a group, or kind of living on mission with some people who have some similar passions as they do. So it's been a really cool experience. And I think that Ryan and I have been talking about this the last couple months now. We're working on solidifying some new leadership for there, at our campus, for someone who's going to be able to kind of take that and run with it, even bring it to that next level where we can really see a lot more going on as far as getting those people who are brand new to, the area, into that, kind of figure out who we are, and then help them find their place to belong with us, and, kind of track that through the process. So it's exciting. I definitely encourage everyone I talk to on a Sunday morning to come through Kickstart. It's good stuff.
So did you join kind of when you reach the end of Kickstart, you go, okay, this is where I want to be? Or did you go to other churches and go to their version of Kickstart and sort of compare all of them like a buffet line or something?
No, I didn't. Actually, that's a good question. I actually tell this story in Kickstart when Kelsey and I are leading it. Kelsey and I got married in 2015, and I moved to Henderson. She was already here, we're not here, but in Henderson. She was already there in Henderson, and so the next step was, hey, we want to find a church home. So the plan was we're going to go here and here and here, and just kind of weigh our options. I'm a very analytical person, so so I was like, we're probably going to create a spreadsheet and things like that. No, it was so we went to One Life. The first, that was our first stop, and it was actually the very first installment of a marriage and family series. It was the model family series, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And I was talking to Kelsey. I said, we're newlyweds, so we should just stay through this series, and then we'll go visit this other place and that other place, and then we'll make our decision. And we just kind of fell in love with, the mission and the vision of One Life. And part of that was because we got right into Kickstart, and kind of got to see all that, like the inner workings of why it is that One Life does things the way they do. And we just kind of fell in love with it, and we never left. We never visited anywhere else.
See, there you go. If people would just do what we said to do, everything would be fine.
Why do you? I think it's an interesting thought. Like, why do you think that? Like for Josh, because I was the same way. Like when I came to One Life, like I wanted to know about it, but some people just want to come in but they don't necessarily want to go through Kickstart or through that experience, but they want to be, I don't know, connected. But I don't know why is it some people come in and they really want that, and some people just don't? Like, what is it that entices you to want to go through something like that?
For me personally, for me, I've grown up in church, and moving to a new area, I was going to be looking for a new church home. And so I kind of knew at least the key points. Like, I just want to make sure that, my values match up with the church's values, and I don't want to end up somewhere that just is misaligned with what I want to see happening. So that's why I immediately wanted to go to something exactly like Kickstart, because of the questions about those things, just kind of the DNA of who One Life is. That was the questions that I had. So that was personally why I wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, it's the kind of things that I wish people cared about, because if I were going to a church too, I'd want to know why they do things. And sometimes we do have people come to our church that they'll be there for a while, and then they'll ask why, and maybe even get upset. What do we do that for? Well, you want to say, hey, if you went to Kickstart, we explained that. and then if you don't like the why, that's fine. But if you just kind of react from your seat, it gets a little frustrating. So, because that's what it is. It's really saying, okay, when you see us do everything from I think we got a prayer request card this past Sunday that somebody wrote, too much smoke or something like that on the card. Okay, that's fine. But why do you do the smoke? Why do you do? Okay, we will explain. Again, you don't have to buy our explanation, but it's nice to know if you hear that, you would at least go, okay, well, I get it, and I'm on board or I'm not on board. But
I think there's a big draw with the emphasis of the excellence that we put on our Sunday morning experience. That's if you haven't been in a setting like that, it's pretty, impressive initially. And so lots of people that I talk to, especially in Henderson, which is a little bit of a smaller field than Evansville, that you walk in there and that's pretty impactful. So that would be something that initially I would want to be a part of, just because just because the music and our language that we use is super disarming. But then if you have people that have been in church their whole life, once they, like you said, they get frustrated because things aren't, okay, wait, we've never done this in a church, or we didn't do it like this in the church I grew up in. And that really meant a lot to me. But all the things I love about One Life are the things that are different from everything I've ever experienced. So it's almost like this wrestling of tension, that there's kind of this fresh way of looking at things that people really like. But when it comes to, grabbing a hold of the real reason behind the why that we do that, there's very intentional reasons why we do the Sundays the way we do them. That tends to trip people up, sometimes easily missed. And I loved what you said. Well, you should have gone to Kickstart.
Well, and I want people to know the why, because sometimes I think they're interpreting it through a grid, like we do that just simply because we're trying to be cool, or we're trying to be loud, or whatever we're trying to. And it really is not that way. It's that's not the kind of thinking that goes into the motivations. And so I wish people knew the motivations behind it.
and I'll lead in to kind of the beginning of Kickstart a lot of times when I'm kind of introducing myself and, what the Kickstart experience is going to be. I'll kind of lead with that sometimes, like that One Life is a lot different than maybe where you grew up or, just the more traditional church setting that you may have experienced in the past. But there's intentionality behind that. And Kickstart is kind of designed to give you those whys, like why do we have the hazer and why is the music so loud and the lights low and things like that. But those decisions were made with intentionality. And so given those whys, can kind of bring people into the loop a little bit.
And every tech guy that heard you say hazer instead of smoke is going to love you.
Yeah.
I was quoting a prayer card.
I know you were.
I only heard that.
That should be our response. It's a hazer, sir. It's not we don't even do smoke.
I only know that because our tech guy has said it and I've just been privy to it.
There you go. Yeah. Good catch. Yeah. Why the hazers? What's up with that? Yeah. And you at least have a setting to do that in. That's fun.
Man. Well, it's a good time to mention if you are interested in finding out more about Kickstart or interested in registering for the next upcoming Kickstart, which if you're listening the week of, what is this? Would have been the week of the 21st, April 21st, 2019. You can go to onelifechurch.org/Kickstart and register for this Sunday. But we usually do them every couple months, and there's an opportunity for you to sign up. But you can check out more about Kickstart there, watch a little video about it, but also register, and we'd love to connect with you there. So make sure we hit that as well. But what we do want to do is use the rest of our time today and talk a little bit about some of the questions that people have submitted. And I will read a few of them, and whoever wants to, decide to answer one of these questions, you just feel free to jump in. So these questions are from people who actually been through Kickstart, and these are some of the questions that we just had said, hey, if there's something that's still on your mind that you didn't get a chance to ask, or maybe you've always wanted to ask in church, and maybe sometimes for some reason you didn't feel comfortable asking out loud, write it down, and we will do our best to try to just have some conversations around it. So we're going to do some of that today.
And Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Josh, and I'm remembering the way we designed the experience this was under the value of we believe you can bring your brain to church, that value, in that where we bring up the questions, like, because we talk about we want to create an environment where you can feel like you can ask thing. Am I remembering that correct? Okay. It's been a while since.
Well, and now that we've condensed it into the 2 weeks, all the values are in week 2, and the mission and vision are in week 1. So but we do get to that in that,
I haven't been to the newfangled, express version of the thing. But I'm impressed you graduated from the real true meaty
that's right,
the
one. The 4
that we need to change off of. Yeah.
He's got a better tenure.
It's 12 of them are going, okay, good. 12 values in one day. Here you go. Yes. Get ready.
That is one of our values, that we evaluate everything for continual improvement. And we evaluated the Kickstart experience.
If you can, man.
People don't commit to 4 weeks, but they might too. So that's what we do.
That's good.
Right now. So I'm going to jump in with a good question. So I don't know who wants to answer it, or not necessarily answer it, but at least start the conversation on it. So the question is, why are Christians so critical of different lifestyles attending any church? We should be open. And maybe this question is less about One Life in general, but just in general, why are Christians so critical of different lifestyles? And I think maybe the question might be something that we see in culture today. A lot of people believe that people of faith are critical of other people's lifestyles or other faiths, and I'm not really sure if I would agree with that, but maybe it's how people are perceived.
Well, I feel like in American culture, at least especially in Henderson, I guess I can speak the most directly to, is we tend to correlate Christianity or being followers of Jesus with this kind of weird thing, like I have to be Mr. Morality here, and I can't, there's no messing up, and you have to be kind of holy or whatever it may be. We tend to link our connection with Christianity to our behaviors and what we do or don't do or can or can't do or should or shouldn't do and things like that. And so therefore, if we're committing our lives and our identity is rested in this form of us being good, and we're fighting hard for that, and really trying to make that happen. And I think that's a beautiful thing in some sense. But when there's somebody that would challenge that understanding or that reality or that lifestyle that you've chosen to kind of honor God with your behaviors and all that way. And somebody that comes in kind of claiming the same thing that you claim, and, you know, all your values tied up in behaviors, and they don't behave the same way you do. I feel like sometimes, and I've probably been there. I mean, I was raised, you know, in a pretty conservative, I mean, my family was very, you know, not like super harsh, not super, you know, we were not unaccepting, but the context of the church which I was raised in was super behavior driven. And so there was almost a fear in a sense of letting some outside viewpoint infest or infect or whatever, however you want to say it. That sounds harsh, you know, but I think that was probably a viewpoint, subconscious way of seeing it, infest your lifestyle and what you're trying to do in your relationship with God. And so I think it's a really dangerous thing for us as followers of Jesus, to link our goodness, if you will, with that. You know, it's despite of the fact that we're not good, and Jesus still did what he did for us. And when we celebrated this last weekend, that's where the beauty of the message is. And sometimes that just gets lost and translated as behavior modification. And so it's just unfortunate and sad.
Yeah, it strikes me when you want to get to the why. And I hear you saying this, is that it probably comes from not a true deep sense of grace and what it meant, and being impacted by that. In other words, I didn't. There are a lot of people, especially people who grew up in church, and it does become about behavior. And I have sympathy because there's, first of all, there is a behavior part of it, because I know that there was a time in my life when I was on the road. I was living life for myself. I was doing my thing. I was making my own rules. I was doing my own thing, and I knew when God was calling me, that's over. That's done. You're going to go on a different road, and you're not going to do things the way you say to do them. You're going to do things the way I say to do them. But and so you associate it that way. You're going another way, but you leave the grace part out of it. And if your heart hasn't been humbled adequately by grace, you'll tend to just become Mr. Moral Majority guy and think and kind of point the finger at everybody else instead of the mercy side of it.
And that makes me think of a message that you preached one time, and you talked about the.
That's a great intro for all of your answers.
I think not really. This one sticks with me all the time. And you talked about there's it was a parable of the, I can't remember where it's at. But anyways,
that's the other part you should add about the messages. It reminds me of a message, but I don't remember it at all.
You know, if we all had these debts, right? If I had a $5 debt, you know, Josh had a $50 debt, and Sarah had a $500 debt, and you had a $50,000 debt. Yeah. You know, there's this idea of somebody who was walking like a train wreck life that God literally kind of saved them out of, or called them out of, to use the language that you used. There's a sense of gratitude there, that may be more than if I'm just a kind of the whole $5 debt gets paid off. I'm super grateful that somebody paid for my $5, but I don't feel the urgency or the weight of $50,000 like you did.
Right.
And so there's this, it's like we lose touch at some point along the journey with our walk with Jesus. We lose touch, and we forget what the weight of that $50,000 debt feels like, or maybe we were never able to identify with that to begin with. And it's really hard to walk with grace whenever you have lost the sense of urgency or weight of what you've actually been forgiven from.
Yeah, I was taken from a story that Jesus tells where the woman comes up behind the woman who lived a sinful lifestyle. She's washing his feet, she's crying, and then he tells, and the Pharisee says, well, if you knew what kind of woman she was, you wouldn't be responding that way. And then he tells a little story, which one would be more grateful. Mm-hmm. And the hook to the story is the Pharisee assumes he doesn't have a debt, and she does. And if he would recognize that he had a debt, he would be doing what she was doing. Mm-hmm. And his whole point to the Pharisee was, you don't realize you have a debt, or you'd be doing the exact same thing. So I guess back to the question is, the reason that people do it is because they've lost touch with grace. Mm. And some of us who have associated with lifestyle because we were very different before, it's hard to remember that if you haven't been there for 30 years and you really turned over a new leaf and quit doing all the things you were not supposed to be doing. You can tend to all of a sudden get real self-righteous real fast. Mm. And so it's a loss of touch with grace would be my thing.
If you ask anyone in my in my growth group, they would probably tell you that I can figure out a way to relate any conversation to the table series, because I don't know, that one just is something that
you are groups guys. So there you go. That's right. It's it's in your job description.
Yeah, exactly. I have to relate everything to the table series, but that's kind of what it makes me think of, because I think it's easy to, if you have found your seat at the table, to consider, to think of yourself like, well, I have a seat at the table. And that's good. We do need to identify as, someone who's been invited to the table. But what we have to kind of keep in mind, and I guess as it becomes critical, this is what must be forgotten, is that we don't deserve our seat at the table any more than, with the $5 debt, any more than the $50,000 debt. We both deserve our seat at the table equally, which is, none. But we have been invited there. And so it's our kind of responsibility to bring other people to the table. And so I guess, if it becomes from your seat at the table, if it becomes critical, I think that's a miss, because we're forgetting that it's our responsibility to pull up a seat at the table for them as well. So that's how I relate it to the table.
Mephibosheth.
Mephibosheth. Yeah, exactly.
And we will do that the rest of this time.
I will.
And no matter what the question is, relate it back to the table series.
How does that
I think
relate
we got a
to the
dinosaurs
table?
one coming up.
Exactly.
So we'll look forward to that. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to another question. And so the question is, so I have the question that it was written, and then the person who led Kickstart at that time tried to also kind of translate a little bit of what they think maybe was saying here. So where do you draw the line? ? God is in control of everything, or is it man's responsibility to do? And kind of, I think what we're asking is how should we balance the idea that God is fully in control of everything with the responsibility of humans to participate in the affairs of the world?
Yeah. All right.
You
drew the short straw for that one. No, I have a go-to illustration on that topic.
Is it from the table?
I wish it was. I don't think it is. But, yeah, we did a study of Ephesians. It wasn't the table. Ephesians a few years back, and we did the first chapter, and we talked about predestination and those things. And one thing I always want to say is that you always have to remember that true classic atheism does not believe in free will. That's what a lot of people don't know. They think Christianity has a problem with free will versus sovereignty. A true atheist does not believe in free will. They believe that all your thinking, all your action comes from a chain reaction that started at the Big Bang. And so you're just, they are fatalist and determinist. So Sam Harris wrote a whole book on that. So, but that's not my illustration. My illustration is this, and you guys can fill in blanks, is following my grandchild around. And you relate everything to the table. I relate everything to my grandson. But I'm watching this again because I watched this with my kids. It helped me more than any other single thing I've experienced was if you've ever followed around, he's 2. If you've ever followed around a 2-year-old and just let them go, you're watching free will and sovereignty in action at all times. Because I'm the sovereign. He ain't going anywhere I don't want him to go, ultimately. But I let him go all kinds of places because I try to do that. I was with him just yesterday, and he picked up every little rock and stick and smelled things and looked at things and threw things. But every now and then he want to go over towards the street and say, nope, you're going to stay right here. The overall experience was designed by me, the overall direction of where he was going. But he didn't know either. He didn't know how much I was. He thought he was as free as a bird. He was just doing great. He was making choices, but he wasn't even aware of my ultimate kind of watchdogging of that. And for me, that's a matching. I don't think this question is as far, the reason I use that illustration is it's not as far from our own experience as we sometimes think of it. It's not completely unrelatable in my view, that God is sovereign, yet we have free will. It's not, we do that as parents almost as a lifestyle. Even before our kids get there and they arrive, we build a nursery for them, or we plan things for them. We set up these parameters, but still there's these areas where they can go around. So I don't know if that helps you or not, but it's always helped me just to think of my kids or my grandkid running around in front of me. So
that's a good one.
Yeah, I remember you giving that illustration when you taught on the message.
That's the only one I have.
And
I don't think you had your grandson at the time, so it was a little less personal. So I think it's even stronger now. Now you should. Yeah, and I am. I'm experiencing again, and it's fun because that's exactly what I saw here. So I was gonna get a kick out. I was like, it does. It works. It's fun to watch.
I feel like that's one of those questions as people are exploring faith, especially in kind of a college age, that you kind of enjoy having conversations about a lot in these debates, and you feel like you have to land on one side or the other and you have to argue. And I feel like as you explain it that way, I'm like, I can almost breathe thinking about it that way. Like it feels like, okay, that makes sense to me. I'm not arguing about this or that. God is still sovereign, and yet I'm still making choices in my life.
Yeah, and I think another thing about it is that unfortunately that conversation a lot of times not always, but a lot of times comes from and also moves towards negative side of life. Like, for example, nobody's going to question the sovereignty of God and his will if it's his will for you to be a millionaire, right? If it's his will that you get $1 million every week in your bank account, like nobody's going to have a problem with that. It's going to be an okay deal.
That's right. Lord is sovereign. Right? Bless his name.
Yeah, a lot of the times, like, people have it's the real problems that kind of trigger the suffering and the bad things that happen. Why would God allow or send people to hell? Those kinds of questions that tends to be nested in, because if, it was God's will that, every single person, ended up in heaven all the time, I don't feel like there would be as much of a pushback towards it. And so, I think that it's good, healthy. That's a really good, I've heard that. I just had forgotten that illustration until you said that. And that's a really, really great way to put it, because it was a very, very beautiful thing for your grandson to be walking around and doing and exploring and learning. And he was having all kinds of fun. He'll probably remember pieces of that at some point in time, flashback when he's 20 years down the road. But he also has no clue how dangerous that road is.
Exactly.
And the catastrophe that could be waiting there had you not been there to provide even potential punishment had he tried to run towards that or something. And so it's an interesting, I think it's a healthy, if we can enter into those types of conversations from a very healthy and positive, like a conversational position. I feel like it's super helpful to do that, as opposed to Sarah, I'm going to try to convince you to agree with me, on this kind of thing.
Well, that's why I look for life experience stuff, because John Calvin called the Bible God's baby talk, and it's human communication from God. So that's why I look for inside of life illustrations like that, because I think one of the reasons people trip up is because they think of it as completely beyond their own experience, when it's really not. When you think about it, you actually have a free will sovereignty thing that goes on in your own life and in your own experience, especially if you do have children. And if you've ever taken care of children, you don't have to have them yourself.
It's true.
If you've ever worked in the nursery, you've got that going on.
Just had a John Calvin reference on the One Life podcast.
That's right, Betty.
Wow.
That's right. We can break out more of that. That's all right.
Yeah. One thing that's always interesting is a lot of times when you get Kickstart questions, a lot of these are similar questions that a lot of people all have. And it's not that these questions have gone away, and Bret kind of made this reference before we started, is that we're not just going to answer it and be like, okay, you never have to ask these questions again, because we know people are going to continue asking them. So it is another reminder that all of this right now that we're doing is try to create a conversation for you to continue having conversation of yourself as you learn. Hopefully this is an opportunity for you to grow from that, as well as you kind of find where God's leading you on that answer. So I'm going to move on to another question, and we'll ask Josh how the table series fits into this. When God made all the large dinosaurs, what era is that in the Bible? It never really mentions it. Was the time they walked on the earth before or after Christ? It doesn't say anything about Noah bringing the dinosaurs on the ark. Just always wondered.
Oh, I thought Josh had to go first because it was the table series. That reminds me of relationships. You need to get in a group to study that stuff. Talk about
that's what. If you want to sit at the table, we have to launch a new growth group to talk about the dinosaurs. Right.
And so, it'd be packed. We would be a small group, be a large group. We've got that question so many times.
It would be a packed group.
We did it before, but no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, also, I have to highlight that as we were launching a preteen room at our East Campus, one of the questions that they wanted to talk about was, what about dinosaurs? So, and every time I've led a middle school or high school group, one of the first times I'm like, what questions do you guys want to talk about? what about dinosaurs? Every age group wants to know about dinosaurs. So it just doesn't go away.
That's right. That's where you say, they didn't exist. And then you go on the next thing. It's all a conspiracy.
Super helpful. That's right. Conspiracy. I like that.
That's right.
Find a documentary.
Yeah, that's right. So
I have zero frame of reference for an answer for this question. Just being honest. I've never looked into. I need to look into it because, but I think me and my sons are going to do that together.
Oh, good. Okay.
Just to kind of draw.
Well, in that case, I have a few things. It doesn't have to do with my grandson yet, but I know he'll ask about dinosaurs, so I might as well get ready. And this is to Sarah's point. I think one of the things, and answers to these kinds of questions are. For me, like the grandson example is that's what's helped me to mentally kind of navigate a doubt or a problem or some kind of stumbling block in my head. And on the dinosaur question, that's the same thing. I think you want to answer these questions in a way that can help you navigate back to who Jesus is, what he did on the cross, his resurrection from the dead. You want to start there and work your way back. So if I know the resurrection is real, then I can kind of, what does he say about dinosaurs? Well, and to the point in the question, the Bible doesn't talk about a whole lot of things when you think about it. There's a lot of subject matter it leaves out. Francis Schaeffer said that the Bible gives us it doesn't give us exhaustive revelation. It gives us sufficient revelation. Exhaustive means it would talk about everything, which it does not do, but it gives us sufficient. In other words, God wanted to communicate to you what you needed to know him. Period. It's all there. Yeah. Then he gives a lot of bonus tracks, it seems like, in there. So on the dinosaur question, we did talk about this last time.
We did, yeah.
And I go with schools of thought. I used to be, and I say this very hesitantly, I used to be a pretty rabid, a young earther as far as frame of reference for that. I've loosened up on that a whole lot. I treat it almost like I call it front burner issues and back burner issues. I kind of let it cook back there in the background, but I reserve the right to be a young earther at any time I want to. That's how I handle it. It's like, I'm going to be one today. That's fine. Because first of all, it's such a not slam dunk thing that I feel like I can operate with that. But as far as, so you could look at it the way a young earther would look at it is he could have put dinosaurs on the ark, but think about this. If you were going to put animals on a boat and you had limited space, what would you do? Just ask. I'm asking you guys, what would you do? How would you handle that? You can't let the space be too long. We're on a podcast.
That's true.
Don't be afraid of silence in a small group. But on a podcast, we aren't afraid of silence.
Smallest ones first.
Smallest one. Well, but think about it. Nothing says you have to have a full-grown animal on there. If you're going to have a grizzly bear on there, wouldn't you rather have something that was cute and cuddly and you could just carry around like a young one? You wouldn't put a full-size, 10-foot tall grizzly bear on the ark. You just let him grow up. So it's the same with dinosaurs. That's what they would say. They would say, well, they could have had, dinosaurs start as reptiles and eggs. So why not have one that's, 6 inches long and put it on the ark? And then you've got all of them in one box.
So I just had a vision of an ancient person going after a dinosaur egg in my mind, like
going after a dinosaur
egg,
a
velociraptor egg or something. It's like,
that's right.
How are you going to get that egg? Sorry.
But that's it. The answer is how they get these giant things on there. It's the same way you'd get an elephant on there. You wouldn't pick some giant full-grown elephant. You just pick a baby elephant and put it on there. By the time it's off the ark, it could reproduce, all the rest. So anyway, that's answering the younger side. Others would just say the ages that they lived did predate much of the creation story that you're not, or those not the creation story, but the stories within the Bible where Abraham and the first chapters of Genesis do come up. And I lean that way for reasons I won't get into now because it's a little bit belabored. If you want to follow up, I would love to be able to answer those things. But that pretty much the eras of the world kind of follow what geologists would say. But there is a lot of debate out there, and some will probably push back on me pretty hard for saying that. So
yeah, I listen to. I've been kind of looking at some of that stuff recently. I've been studying through kind of the Torah and just the real Old Testament stuff. And one of the resources that we point people to at One Life is the Bible Project, and the Bible Project podcast, and then the kind of the head, I guess the main teacher from the Bible Project, Tim Mackey, has a separate podcast that I listen to some too. And he kind of explained Genesis is broken into two pretty distinct areas. There's Genesis 1 through 11, and then there's 12 through 50, and they're pretty different. And he said 1 through 11, the way he explained it was 1 through 11 is more like the 30,000 feet view of, all of this stuff that happened. And that could have happened over, a period of time that's undetermined. But then it zooms in at chapter 12 on the family of Abraham and then starts to track with that.
Right.
Because like you said, and in John, it says that, there's tons of things that are not written here. Jesus did so much that it couldn't be contained in all the books in the world or whatever. There's tons of things that are not in the biblical narrative, but that doesn't mean that they're not historical or didn't happen. And that 30,000 foot view of that Genesis 1 through 11 is just kind of setting the stage for Abraham and his lineage, which is what points directly to Jesus eventually. And that's just how they get there. Yeah. And so I thought that was really insightful about that, because it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And so the answer is not there, but the Bible doesn't point, you away from dinosaurs being on the ark or, them being around.
Yeah, if you look at the whole Genesis thing, the more I've heard scholars like that, they point out that, first of all, Genesis 1 is very unique in the history of literature, and it's this amazing thing, and no one can quite define what it is. The people that really have a lot of expertise at looking at the language, they said it's unlike any other piece of literature that they can find. It has similarities to things, but it's not a poem, it's not a hymn, but it sort of is a hymn, and it sort of is a poem, but it sort of is narrative. They said it's sort of a lot of things, but it's so unique to itself. But that's why they kind of put it in this territory where it's dealing factual information, but at the same time in a way that's more poetic and all this kind of thing. So that's why we have to think about literary genres and all those things. Mm-hmm. So, but the dinosaur question, I think you have the option of, you can track with exactly what scientists say, but remember, science is a moving target too, and who knows? If I were you, I would look into young Earth stuff too. They're not. Some people dismiss that as that's ridiculous. No, it's really not. There's a lot of fun stuff in there. I had a blast with it, and there's a lot of interesting insights to give them a shot at doing. And we're talking Harvard guys. I mean, there's one fairly well-known young Earther that is a Harvard paleontologist. And so So don't dismiss them outright.
So it's interesting. There is so much information out there, so many different people with different information that they've studied, and not believing that, I don't know, everyone's looking for something and they're finding information. So there's a lot to look up. It's funny, I was looking at the podcast email, and there was someone actually asked, I meant to bring this up a couple weeks ago on Braxton Hunter's episode. They asked in the comments, were kangaroos on the ark? So it's like, still, even that question is similar in that, it's
right.
just like,
and again, the Bible doesn't say that dinosaurs were, they didn't say kangaroos, it didn't say zebras, it didn't say a lot of things. Right. It doesn't really tell you, other than the sheep and all that. Sheep are always there, but referenced in every Bible chapter. But yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask 2 more questions. We got time for about 2 more questions. And so this one is more of a statement, but I think we'll ask the question from it. The person just wrote, quote, how to live with a non-Christian. How do you live with a non-Christian? I'm not sure if that is in reference to a marriage, or if it's just in reference to, in general, maybe just someone who is a non-Christian and you live with them. Maybe it's family, like parent, sibling. And I think that is definitely a question that Ryan should answer.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Well, I think it's really...
Or discuss, I should say.
Marriage is kind of mine and my wife's thing that we spend a lot of time in, and we work on with other couples and things like that. So I'll take that angle. So actually, I've known several couples to where, one of them either... is a follower of Jesus and the other one wasn't when they got married, or that maybe one of them came to know Jesus after they had gotten married and the other one did not follow. And I think the biggest challenge that I've noticed in that is when you're in a marriage situation, or it really could be anybody that you love a lot, right? You always want what's best for them. And if you've had this radical experience of encountering, this grace from Jesus that we were talking about earlier, that we tend to forget so much sometimes, then I think what I've learned is that what people tend to want for their spouse or their kids or anybody else, people that they love the most, is they want them to have that same experience. And they want it so bad. And like, I know a lady I grew up with, she prayed for her husband for like 32 years. And he didn't come to know the Lord until after he retired from work. I mean, they raised their kids together. They're great people. And then he retired. He came to be a follower of Jesus, and then now he's serving and leading and doing things. And so it was a journey for them. But I know for a fact that she struggled with that for a really, really long time. And I think the hardest part is it feels like it's two kind of different journeys that you're going to go on. You're wrestling through that, and I think how do you live with somebody that's not a follower of Jesus when you are? And I think the answer to that question is that you afford them the same grace that you've been given, and you understand that their journey is not yours to control. It's not, their relationship with or to the Lord is not up to you. It's not in your hands. But so do what you can and manage your expectations outside of that. And that would be my thing, because at the end of the day, the Scripture tells us that we pray for one another and we do things like that, and we share the gospel or the good news whenever we can, whenever we get the opportunity. We do that, but at the end of the day, the changing is on Him, and that's a pretty freeing thing for us as believers and followers of Jesus, is that I don't have to worry about changing anybody. But what I get to do is I can pray for them, I can love them well, I can serve them well, and I can show them grace upon grace with patience.
Yeah, and remember that other people are just as tough as you were to come to Christ. Yeah. So I got to remind myself, that was no easy project. I mean, someone that I'm kind of wanting, why doesn't he get this? Well, the same reason you didn't.
It's so good. It's true.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what's coming right now, right?
The table series.
I feel like I wish I had a little button I could press, and it's just like table
Here
series.
it comes. Table series reference.
Ryan kind of a mention of it that you have to afford them the same grace that you've been afforded, and I think that goes back to if you're living with someone, whether it's a spouse or a sibling or a whatever, just a loved one, or a roommate, whatever, that doesn't see things the way you see them, that you have to be careful not to come across like there's some sort of either like superiority or exclusivity or something like that. Right. You have to avoid them that same level of grace, and you have to be willing to invite them to the table, because that's the whole goal. If we believe, or I truly believe that what I've found is incredible, and I want them to experience that, and I want them to pull up a seat with me, but it's never going to be, I can't force them into the chair and drag them to the table, because it has to be something that they...
Well, you probably could.
Well, maybe. Yeah, that's right. but
that's a side note. Josh sometimes in his spare time is someone who fights in an octagon. So just so you should know.
Just like, every other year now, apparently. But yeah, I think that, it goes back to, before we came to the table, before we, got where we are, Jesus loved us while we were still yet sinners. And, we just have to love them, serve them the same way Jesus did with us and the same way He does with them. And if we continually pursue excellence in exemplifying Jesus, then, that message is going to be, lived out. It doesn't have to be something that you beat into their head until they, finally just comply with your will. It's something that you can live out and exemplify, and, hopefully that they see it through you.
Well, and one of my favorite things about Christianity in general is that it's a belief system that allows for disagreement. Like, it's a belief system that really allows coexistence with anybody, regardless of who they are or what they believe or what they don't believe. And that's not super common in the world of religious belief.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it's worth noting in 1 Peter that in the case of a wife that's married to an unbelieving husband, he coaches them to treat their husband with gentleness and respect, so that they'll be won over without words. I love that little phrase, won over without words. And in other words, so words should come last in your living with someone. That just keep your behavior as the front sales pitch that you're making.
Yeah, and I think as I'm thinking about that question again, I'm always trying to look at it from two sides, because I think from one, we're looking at like, how do we do this? But I also think that most of the time when someone's asking that question, they're so excited about what they've received that they want other people to know about it so much that it can come off as like, why don't other people understand? Why don't, how do I live with this person? That sometimes just living your life and people seeing the joy that you have is what makes the change, and makes them ask questions, at least, of like, what's different about you? And it leads into a conversation that you want to force to have, but a lot of times you can't. And I've made that mistake before, and wish I wouldn't have, but I learned from it for sure. But one thing I would say from a student perspective, as I've worked with students in the past, I've worked with a lot of students whose parents do not believe, but they do, as middle school or high school kids. And I think that there's something that is so beautiful about that, because that they've come to this realization of something that's personal for them, but they want their parents to have that as well. And they've asked this question: how do I get my parents to come, or how do I get them to come to church or hear what I have? And a lot of it is just they'll come and check it out because they've been like, something's different in my child. I want to see that. And so I think that is usually would be my response, is just live what in the grace and the joy that God has given you. And I think people that love you will see that as well.
Yeah. And I think too, kind of to piggyback off that, I think an overeagerness can a lot of times be detrimental to, what you're going for. Because if you come across as, too abrasive or whatever, then it may not allow them to see, see it as well as if you're just living it. If you're just living it and you're not trying to force your worldview on them, then they're more likely to see it as an illustration rather than, like Bret said, words last.
And a mistake I made when I was in college, I thought that one of my roommates was someone who I would have considered was not a Christian. And years later, she always asked, why didn't you ever invite me? And I had this in my head that she didn't want to come, but so I never invited. And if I would have, she said she would have came. And so I think that was something for me to learn, is I was putting, I was deciding who, as Bob Goff, we heard him last week, was under the hat. He was saying, who's under the hat? I was deciding, I was writing her story and I didn't invite. And she's like, why didn't you invite? I would have came. And so I think keep inviting, keep asking, even if they say no, I don't think they're going to be annoyed by you asking, unless you're, mad if they say no. So, okay, just wanted to invite. So.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good tip. Don't get mad if they say
How
no.
dare you say no to me?
Josh will fight you. Just kidding. Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question, and this one actually came in to the podcast, which if you have any questions that you'd like to ask for another session like this, or just in general about One Life or the podcast in general, you can email us at podcast@onelifechurch.org. That comes to me, and I usually save them up for days like this. So one of them that came in was, someone recently asked me why One Life doesn't have any symbols of God or Jesus, like a cross or anything. I didn't know what to tell them. Can you explain?
Well, if they'd go to Kickstart, they would know. See how that works? It's
That's right.
Actually, I say that, but I don't think we deal with that at Kickstart. I don't think we said that. Why? Well, okay, the first why is, this sounds horrible to say, but I can say no one really thought of it necessarily. Just because when we designed our first building over in Henderson, we knew the look we wanted, and we knew, actually, we used to have pictures that hung from the ceiling that I still sort of miss. But we wanted to do something that was different. I will say that. We hung some photos, artistic photos from the ceiling, because we wanted them to see art. We wanted the building to be surprising. We wanted it to be different than what they were used to. And when you walked in, because the whole point was to, I always say, I want to try to come in through the back door of people's minds and hearts, instead of just doing exactly what they expect us to do. Because most people in our area, we're in the Midwest, you have to remember that, we're in the Bible Belt, they've been there, done that. They have church background, and so they have this caricature in their head of what church is going to be when they walk in the door. Well, we wanted from the the front doorknobs to be different than what they had in their heads. Right. So they would just start thinking about it differently. And that means the messaging, that means everything, all the details. And when we first designed the first building. And so we didn't think in terms of putting up crosses or any of the typical things, only because of that. We're certainly not against them. I'm not. We put a cross over in the West Side campus for a while. We did one though that we welded. There was a guy that welded a piece of art out of it and all that. So we wanted to take a different approach, but really that was the core idea. idea, was to be different, to be unexpected, to get past what I call heard it all beforeism, because a lot of people suffer from that. They walked in Easter yesterday. Okay, well, how many Easter messages have I heard? How many? Well, let's try something that maybe you haven't heard before. And that's why we open up the songs that we do. It's just to kind of put people a little bit off their normal balance. But it's not an anti, we don't do crosses thing. It's more of a, we'd like to do something different thing.
Just to champion Kickstart just a little bit, you do touch on that in one of the Kickstart videos.
Oh, I do, really?
Yeah,
okay.
That at the inception of One Life, the whole thought process on it was that you just kind of had this vision of a place where people could come of all walks of life and like different areas on the spectrum of faith, whether that's, just a longtime believer or what we call an explorer, who just has hard questions, and they can gather together and find a place where they can ask those hard questions and get a gracious answer. And that all that intentionality is kind of built into, the way things look. I mean, it is a little less traditional because tradition, like you said, people have seen that. And so we just wanted to offer, I guess I wasn't around at that point, but, offer something different.
Yeah, and I remember, I can still remember the 3 pictures we put up, and they were kind of, one of them was of this little girl from Afghanistan. There was a great photo. It could have been in Life magazine or something, but I loved it because it was so striking. And why is that there? I mean, because it was a beautiful shot, but it had something to do with global missions. We had been we wanted that question to come up. And I think if someone just sees like a cross, well, everybody's used to seeing crosses and they wouldn't ask that. But if they see this picture of this little girl from Afghanistan, this kind of artsy shot, she had this kind of makeup on her eyes and she was looking at the camera a certain way.
It's still in Henderson.
It causes you, I know it's somewhere, I want it. If we're not going to use it, I want it in my office or something. But it would cause you to think differently. It's just like, why is that there instead of, I hate to say it this way, but most people, if they walk past a cross, they don't think at all. Now, if we could think of a way to present one where it did cause them to think or reflect or wonder in any way, then that would be kind of interesting way to do things. So that's why we were, for me, that's the definition of art, and that's one of our core values as well, that you can learn about in Kickstart if you'll go this way.
I'm glad someone asked that question. I had never heard that response, so that was good.
Hadn't you really?
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I would have got to that if I thought about it, but
Okay.
not really. Thank you, everyone, to submitting questions. And again, as you go through Kickstart, feel free to ask questions, and we're going to do our best to try to talk about them. And again, just have some conversations. And this is fun for us. It's fun for us to hear what the thoughts that you're having as you're exploring faith, exploring One Life, and we love doing that. And so we are going to kind of wrap up as we kick off to our Common Chaos series. We kicked that off this past Easter Sunday, and then I know Bret's going to be diving into that this Sunday. Bret, what can we expect this Sunday?
Well, the way we did say relationships, addictions, and stress, and it'll kind of follow that basic pattern. The first couple of weeks, we'll talk about relationships, and then we'll kind of bridge over into addictions and finish up with stress. But we're going to run all 3 of them I'm going to try to thread them all. But we said we're going to look at scientific data on these things, and then we're going to look at the biblical data, and then we're really going to emphasize the power of God side of this. Our staff is going to be praying, and our prayer teams are going to be praying for those names that were turned in on Easter over the 6-week period, and by name. And we're really asking God to do some powerful stuff. So that's the plan.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Josh, for joining us today. It's been really fun getting to hang out with you guys, as always.
Been better for us.
Oh, nice.
It's better to be here.
I can't wait. I'm going to be over hanging out in Henderson this week, shooting a video, checking out the new wall.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's pretty exciting. It's a whole new world in the Henderson campus. So if you haven't been over there in a while, you should check it out as we're making some changes in the lobby. So it's pretty exciting. But thank you guys all for joining us on the podcast. As always, we really appreciate it. If you subscribe, share, leave us a comment. We want more people to hear these conversations as well. So we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the One Life Church podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and subscribe. That way you'll get an alert anytime there's a new episode. If there was something that you heard that you really want other people to know, share it out on social media. You can use the hashtag #OLPodcast. To ask us a question here at the podcast, you can email us at podcast@onelifechurch.org. I'm one of your co-hosts, Sarah Inman, and I produced this episode. Our music is produced by Micah Robertson and Ben Brock.